All right. Good morning, everybody. It's 10:01, so we'll go ahead and get started. And people may be trickling in, but we just have a few housekeeping things to start off the presentation, pre-presentation stuff. So first of all, thanks for joining. This is Brownfield Boost. We're talking about unlocking resources to revitalize your blighted properties. We've got a few technical support options here if you wind up having any auditory issues or issues with being stuck in the waiting room, things like that. We have a slide here that goes ahead and gives that information. Here's a phone number and an email as well. And we also have it recorded. That recording will be posted later for anybody that may not have been able to attend today. So you might take a moment to write this down. We'll also put the information in the chat. But if you have any technical issues, we have support on hand. If you've never used Zoom before, welcome. There's a few buttons that we use a lot. The unmute button. If you want to turn your video on, you can. Most people don't. It tends to give people better connections. There's also a list of anyone else in the meeting, and then there's the chat window where various information you get posted along the way. One little note on the structure that we're going to be using. We're going to have three presenters. We're going to start with Sarah Darknell from Missouri Department of Natural Resources. Then I will go. I'm Jacob Roeder with Kansas State University. And then I'll be followed by Keith Slider, who's with the EPA Brownfields program. So we're going to go the three presentations back to back, and then we'll leave the last 15 minutes for questions and answers. If you have any questions along the way, feel free to put them in the chat. If they're a simple question, we may be able to have somebody answer it as we're going. But if not, we'll get to them at the end and be able to have some discussion. Quick background on who's putting this on. We're technical assistants to Brownfields. We're through Kansas State University, so we do EPA regions 5, 6, 7, 8. As you can see, the giant swath of purple in the middle of the heartland. It's a national program that's funded by the EPA, so we want to thank them for their support. We've been doing this for a long time, and we're going to be doing it for a long time. But if you're not from Missouri, for example, if you're in a different region, this is also a list of the people that can provide support for your region. But most of this information, I think, is useful for people from any state, but this presentation is particularly focused on Missouri. So with that, I'll go ahead and pass it off to Sarah.
Sarah Nee. I am the outreach coordinator with Missouri Department of Natural Resources, their Brownfields Voluntary Cleanup Program. I really appreciate everybody taking the time to join in and listen today. We already went through housekeeping stuff, so let's go ahead and just dive into Brownfield Boost, unlocking resources to revitalize your blighted properties. What I'm going to talk about today, first is going to be an overview of brownfields for those who are not familiar with the term. Then I'm going to get into the 4 different types of assistance Missouri Department of Natural Resources has for communities with brownfields. And our final thing we're going to go over is a few other state resources that you might find helpful on your redevelopment or revitalization journey. So up first, what is a brownfield? So EPA has given us this definition, the legal definition. It's real property, the expansion, redevelopment, or reuse of which may be complicated by the presence or potential presence of a hazardous substance, pollutant, or contaminant. And if that sounds like a little confusing jargon, you are not alone. I like to try to put it in simpler terms by saying it is land that is abandoned or underused in part because of concerns about contamination. So, what does that look like? What are some examples of properties that people would avoid utilizing because of contamination concerns? Well, it could include old industrial sites, old factories, which is like your textbook source of chemical releases. It could include automotive repair shops that have waste oils, paints, automotive solvents. It could be like your historic downtown buildings that have asbestos and lead-based paint. It could be old gas stations that have, this always has a potential for petroleum releases, especially if older tanks that were just made of metal were left there and corroded over time. It could be like landfills and dump sites. Many towns in Missouri have historic landfills and dump sites that are pre-regulation, and who knows what was buried there. And also old dry cleaners, which depending on the years that operate, might also have some pretty nasty chemicals that we would need to check for. So for developers coming into a community, if they see these sites, they will often bypass them due to the risk associated with these types of properties. And that's what leaves them vacant and underutilized in our towns for so long. Sometimes it's the perception of that contamination. Sometimes that contamination is real and it's there and something that needs to be identified. So, Missouri Department of Natural Resources has four main types of assistance program. Our most popular one is the one at the top, environmental assessments. We can also do project cost analysis, cleanup oversight, and project support. Of these four, three of them are free to local governments and select non-for-profits. And they are the ones highlighted, environmental assessment, project cost analysis, and project support. So I'm going to go through a few scenarios of just when you would use each of these types of assessments. Scenario one, in the city of Anytown, Missouri, the city of Anytown, Missouri has an old abandoned train depot that hasn't been used in decades. The city is actively trying to acquire the building. The city asked the citizens for input on what to do with the depot, and many want to see a park and a walking trail with historic markers. What can the state's Brownfield program do to help? Well, the important thing here is the city is trying to acquire that property. And anytime either a public entity or a private citizen is trying to acquire property, they need something, or they should get something called a phase one and phase two environmental assessment. So what this does, it has four really important things. The first thing, it provides liability protection, which is the basis for the innocent landowner defense. And two, it identifies recognized environmental conditions. And this is really what the phase one was set out to do. A phase one is just kind of the history of the property. Does it have a history of being like a old abandoned gas station? Does it have a history of being an old dry cleaners? And it will make note of that, and we call that a wreck because there's a good possibility that there was some sort of contamination there. And it doesn't just look at the history of that property, it will also look at the history of the adjoining properties. So if there's a gas station next to it that could have had a release and left contamination on the site, it would make note of that too. Three, most banks and lenders require at least a phase one before issuing a loan. Some insurance companies will also require it to offer coverage. And then the final thing that it does that's really important, it helps the property remain eligible for federal grant funds. If you didn't get the phase one or a phase two if needed before you acquire the property, then you don't do what we call all appropriate inquiry, and that does void you from being able to have any sort of federal cleanup dollars for that property. So scenario number two, Good Work nonprofit organization is very involved in the revitalization of Anytown Mo. They are considering purchasing a historic building, downtown building, to renovate their new headquarters. They have already completed a phase one ESA, but still suspect the presence of lead-based paint and asbestos. How can Missouri Brownfield program help them? Well, fortunately for them, we can also provide lead-based paint and asbestos surveys. They are a part of our assistance program, but not directly part of like a phase one or a phase two environmental site assessment. These are additions that you can add on there. When you're getting a phase one, even if you have a phase one done and you want this checked for, you can also apply to our program to get that for free if you are a local government or a nonprofit organization. Now, scenario three, Good Work nonprofit learned that a property that they're considering investing in was once an old gas station. They already had the phase one, phase two ESA completed, and the phase two confirmed the presence of heavy metals, including lead and arsenic, on the site. They are still undecided about whether they should consider the site or move on. So how can Missouri Brownfields program help in this case? So this is that project cost analysis. We call it the analysis of brownfields cleanup alternatives, or an ABCA. And basically, this is just a document that will evaluate the cleanup options for the sites and recommend the overall best cleanup alternative based both on the project cost, the goals for the project, and the effectiveness of the cleanup. And you can see here's a little chart of what one of those cost analysis would look like. When you get an ABCA, you will get three different scenarios. You will get the cost if you clean it up to residential levels. You will get the cost if you clean it up to industrial levels or for commercial use. And you will also be told if you left it as is, what you can do with the property. So it's a very helpful document, both for people that are trying to develop a property or market a property. If it has contamination, and having those numbers on hand is very valuable, but it's also necessary when you are going for grant funding, especially something like a cleanup grant. You will have to have an ABCA completed for that. Scenario number 4. The Landmark Regional Planning Commission has a lot of abandoned and underutilized properties in its region. They've heard of EPA Brownfield grant and want more information. How can Missouri Brownfields program help? Well, we can help them by getting grant information. We partner and work along with EPA, and so we can help provide them information about Missouri, the federal brownfield grants. We write letter of support, so like assessment grants and cleanup grants require letter of support from the state brownfield program, so we can write that for them. We can do brownfield inventories of communities if they're going for an assessment grant and maybe help them pick some priority sites within their community. For cleanup grants, phase 1 and phase 2s and ABCAs are all required in order to get that grant. And as I've mentioned before, those are all available free and no cost to local governments and non-for-profits. So we can help with that pre-work that needs to be done before you can apply for that cleanup grant. And also resource connection. If I cannot do it, I can certainly find someone that can help get that piece of the pie for you, and get those resources you need to apply for whichever grant you decide you are going for. Scenario number 5. So Fast Brews Coffee is interested in putting a new drive-through coffee shop along any town's busiest highway. There was a spot for sale that previously had an old dry cleaners on the corner of the highway and Main Street. Fast Brew Coffee knew the location was ideal, so it purchased the property. They intend to clean the site up to state standards and develop it into their new location. So how can Missouri Brownfields program help? So we have what is called our voluntary cleanup program and our long-term stewardship program. This is available for both private and public organizations, and they can have their site cleaned up, or oversight to clean up that meets to the state standard. So in summary, our voluntary cleanup program, property owners can get oversight for their site cleanup and receive a state clean letter upon completion of the program. A clean letter is a very important document also if somebody wants to sell a site that had contamination on it. The state will provide oversight and ensure that it was cleaned up to a certain amount of standard, and they get that letter and that document, and that will help them sell the property and also ensure that it's health and safety for the future use of that property. Now, this is not a free service. This is a fee-for-service program. And in general, it's about $3,000 to $5,000 to get state oversight for a cleanup project. Now, we also have our long-term stewardship program. Sometimes sites have contaminations that are left on site, either in the ground or in the building, and you leave it with engineering controls. And when that happens, you need something called an environmental covenant. And an environmental covenant just follows that site indefinitely. No matter if somebody purchases the property, it will have that environmental covenant in with the deed of that property. And our long-term stewardship folks here at Missouri Department of Natural Resources will go in and check on and make sure those engineering controls are still in place. So say like an apartment building, has a vapor mitigation barrier, and that property was sold to a new owner. That new owner cannot come in and remove that vapor mitigation barrier and just allow people to live there. Long-term sewage program will audit every once a year those buildings and make sure the engineering controls are still in place and ensure the safety of that site for use of the people that are going to be using it. And this is a one-time fee of $15,000, and that will follow the property indefinitely. Now, a few other Missouri state services. Missouri also has a Brownfield remediation tax credit, and this is through our Department of Economic Development. It can cover up to 100% of remediation costs. This does not have to be owned by a public entity, but the city or county must endorse it. This does not benefit anybody who purposely caused the release of a hazardous substance. And also, the project must result in the creation of at least 10 jobs or the retention of 25 jobs by a private commercial operation in order to be issued those tax credits. Another thing I think you should know about is our historic tax credits. So we have Missouri State Historic Preservation Office, which is called SHPO, and they can help you get your property placed on the historic register. And the federal historic preservation tax credit that you can get from that is about 20% the cost of qualified rehabilitation expenditures. But we also have a Missouri historic preservation tax credit as well through that program, and it provides 25% tax credit for those historic structures in St. Louis and Kansas City, as well as it would provide 35% tax credit for her rehabilitation expenditures if the property is located outside those two cities. So if you combine that together, just for building, it could be up to 45% to 55% of your cost to rehabilitate those structures. So a few takeaways to just wrap this up. Just a reminder, we have 4 ways here at Missouri Department of Natural Resources to assist communities with brownfields. We can do environmental assessments, project cost analysis, project support, and cleanup oversight. And then we have 2 types of tax credits. We have the brownfield remediation tax credits and the historic tax credits to help with your project's renovation and cleanup. So this is my contact information, as well as I invite you to visit our website. You can find it at MissouriBrownfields.com. And a great way to get a hold of me is email me or call me in my office. So that is it for me. I'm going to go ahead and pass it over to Jacob.
Awesome. Thank you, Sarah. Great job. So yeah, I'm Jacob Roeder. I'm the Assistant Regional Director for Kansas State University TAB. We do technical assistance to brownfields. We're funded by the EPA, so we're able to pass along services at no cost. So brief piece of background on me. I was with Missouri Department of Natural Resources for 10 years before I went to work with TAB. My background's environmental, but I also work in Nebraska and Kansas and Iowa as well. And here's my email. You can contact me. I'll bring it up again at the end as well. Brief overview of TAB. This is our map. We cover everything in purple. There's also support in other areas. These are the providers if you are not from Missouri. I'm just the tip of the iceberg on our team, and this team has actually grown quite a bit in the last year. We have another 5 or 6 folks that are not in this photo. So really, and that's not even the limit of our offering. What we really maintain is a large network of partnerships with all types of professionals to really bring the kind of brownfield support that you need. So if you have any questions about your projects, there's a good chance we may know somebody that may have a real specialized answer or niche in that field. So really, we're always starting a conversation and then trying to redirect you to resources if that's something we can't do in-house. But there's a lot we can do in-house. We have folks with brownfield background, city planning background, grant management, all sorts of environmental professionals, geologists, you name it. We either have it or we can try to find it. So again, when we're talking about brownfields, I like to use this photo. A lot of times we're talking about either vacant lots or suspicious buildings. Sometimes just a vacant lot can be really ugly and it may not be contaminated. Or I've got photos of sites that are beautifully landscaped, but actually have much worse contamination issues underneath it. So one of the things we get into is curb appeal and what's behind the curtain. So, sometimes main streets may look like this and they might be um, shuttered businesses, things like that. And you might wonder why. And then sometimes you stick your head in and you realize that the shape that some of these buildings can be in, sometimes they have decades of neglect and deterioration and things like that. So one of the questions is, how do we get these buildings revitalized? One of the main things that comes up is, have you looked at lead paint? Have you looked at asbestos? Have you looked for buried fuel tanks, things like that? Those can all factor in to a project scope and really change the way that the project is planned based on the environmental conditions. So really what you're trying to figure out is what's a good end use of the property and what's clean enough to get there. And sometimes clean enough is very expensive. And so it may make sense to adjust your end use of the site expectations to be something that's economically feasible based on the existing site conditions. We always talk about the things hiding in the closet, and this was one of my favorite pictures from a site visit. This building literally came with a skeleton in the closet, and the owner was happy to show it off. We thought that was a very interesting thing to come across in these site tours, where sometimes you have no idea what's in the buildings, be it dangerous or otherwise. Uh, and then one of my other favorite pictures is, if it was only this easy to just clean up a building, there'd be a lot less issues with this type of redevelopment. But sometimes it can be difficult, sometimes it's not. You really don't know until you go and figure out the environmental side, which is the background. And then sometimes it is just sweeping the floor, and sometimes it's a whole lot more. So really, when we talk about brownfields, what gets us excited is looking at opportunities, because it's one thing to say we want this site is ugly, we don't want it to be what it is. The next question is, what drives the cleanup and the reuse? And so if you have an answer of what you think you'd like, that's half the challenge, and then you figure out how to get to that. The other question can be, we have this site, we don't know what we want it to be, what would be a good fit, and that's a much different question, and we were very good at that as well. So some other ways to think about brownfields, some phrases I've heard. One, it's like a creative land recycling. So figuring out what's a good use for the site as is, what could it be, what's the most efficient route to get between the two. The one I like to say is, we like to put the best thing on the worst site. So a lot of times what we run into is, say you've got an old derelict gas station, and a new gas station wants to come to town and put in a bigger one with more pumps and things like that. A lot of times they might pick the vacant lot across the street so they don't have to deal with the headaches of the former site. That doesn't do anybody any good. That one property is still sort of harming the property values of those around it, and can inhibit a lot of development. So we like to think you take the best thing and you put it on the worst site, and then that is sort of a 2-for-1 thing. Some of the other reasons to really think about the brownfields redevelopment world: there's a lot of federal money available, either directly or through the EPA, or indirectly through pass-through agencies like Missouri Department of Natural Resources, for example. And coincidentally, through us, through TAB, we're funded to hand out the services at no cost using our networks. Um, Another major thing that we wind up seeing is that reuse of the existing infrastructure can be much cheaper than sprawling out and extending infrastructure. Uh, a lot of times these are also very desirable locations. A lot of times they're originally cited to be, let's say, a really high visibility, high traffic area. And so sometimes that can be why it can really draw a lot of attention to itself, is it's right at that main intersection in town that was put in 1952. Uh, and so everybody in town sees it, and it can really cast a unfavorable look on the area, when it may in fact be actually a quite ripe area for investment, especially if you can deal with the perceptions. Also, things like rail access, water access, electrical grid infrastructure, good highway access, those type of things can all really play into the brownfields world, rather than having to move out of town, sprawl out, move all that stuff can get very expensive, and it can be much more cost effective way to reutilize a former site rather than uh, doing another site. And sometimes you can't do that. It just doesn't always work, but sometimes finding the right fit for the site is something that we're really pretty clever at, I think. Another thing to focus on in the brownfields is that, a vacant site isn't doing much good for the local tax A lot of times you can really increase your tax receipts and facilitate that job growth and kind of get that momentum going that sometimes an area just needs a kickstart. And the one thing with the brownfields is you really don't want to get stuck on the environmental stage. Uh, in some ways that can be one of the easiest, and in some ways it can be one of the hardest things for people, is that if they wait until they've got a real estate deal put together and then start looking at the environmental, the time can kill a deal in a way that so many other things can't, because they take time and they take complication. And for an average person it might sound very intimidating, especially if you're even just a real estate professional who might be totally comfortable in a land transaction. But let's say you start hearing about all the acronyms that we can throw around in the environmental world. I think one of the best things that TAB does is we're here to hold your hand along the way and help you interpret things and translate and figure out what the best path forward is. And I would like to always say, don't wait until you're getting to closing to start looking at these things. Look at these things before you even started on anything else. And then, of course, there's less uncertainty, just simplifying the process, getting the community involved so that we have the support. You're not paddling upstream by saying, oh, we think we're going to put this in. And then the community gets riled up and says, that's not what we want. So, really making sure everyone's paddling in the same direction can go a long way. And then also phasing a project along as well can make a big difference. Brownfielders, we can wear a lot of hats. Sometimes we're reading the newspaper a lot, trying to figure out what projects are going on where and who's doing what. Sometimes we're helping people broker deals together of figuring out, what makes something work for both sides. Sometimes we just have to put a party hat on and go celebrate these kind of projects because they can be very challenging sometimes. And usually the community is very happy to see these projects move forward as well. So sometimes it's just recognizing success, and sometimes you get to go ahead and play property detective and help people figure out who's the owner, what are the title issues, what are the environmental histories of properties, things like that. Uh, just a good example of some brownfields in Missouri that DNR is familiar with personally. One is the Joplin Union Depot. That's a former train station that's been sitting for decades. They've put together a pretty good developer package, and they're seeking a developer to help the project move forward. Another one is that Missouri Department of Natural Resources, they've purchased the former International Shoe Factory in Jeff City, and they're rehabbing it into a additional headquarters office. Just a good example of that before and after in the renovation here, you can see a bunch of lead-based paint, all that type of historical charm actually comes out once you remove the paint. And that can be a very cost-effective way versus building a 5-story building that's many tens of thousands of square foot. I forget exactly how many. But really, a nice buildings can have a lot of charm, and we just don't build them the same way we used to, sometimes for better, sometimes for worse. Uh, Here's a whole laundry list of TAB services that we can provide. The slides will be available, so I'm not going to dwell too long on this. Long story short, if you have a project, reach out to us and we'll see what we can find that might help you move along. Things like strategic planning, talking to your community, coming up with renderings, putting together market studies, putting together webinars, reviewing plans, interpreting things, you name it, even support of the EPA Brownfield grant applications. We can review those when the application period is open. So if you have one drafted, we can review it and point out some things that might help improve your application. We also keep a library of those former applications as well. Here's just an example of some site renderings we had one of our partners do for the Joplin Depot. Took some before pictures. They did some really great work doing some nice after visualizations. And these can be the real kickoff thing for something like a grant application or for a community engagement session of saying, here's what it could look like. And that can really take it from being words on a page to something that people can visualize. Here's like a good example of what the Union Depot put together as a solicitation package. Things like structural reports, environmental reports, analysis of brownfield cleanups that Sarah was talking about, some ideas on what the redevelopment could be, market studies, things like that. I think that's an important thing when you're doing a brownfield project. And then I've got a whole laundry list of e-tools. TAB supports several e-tools on our site that we host, and then there's also just a bunch as well. I'm not going to spend much time on any one particular one of these other than to say, feel free to reach out and we can help point you to the right things, but these tools will all be in the notes. So Peer is one. This is a great way to screen multiple databases in using one site. So it pulls from many different sources, and it's a mapping tool. This is a Brownfields inventory that we have. It can help you enter your site information, keep it organized. It's all private, password protected. Only you can see it. Even we can't see your information unless you share it with us. So that can be very useful to some folks as well. You can upload documents, photos, things like that. It's all cloud hosted and free to use. And then a lot of people use it for support with their grant funding, things like that, as well as like reporting with the EPA, keeping track of funding streams, things of that nature. We've got the Tab EZ, that's an EPA grant writing support tool that helps with the formatting. If you're going to do a grant application this fall, it's a yearly cycle. We highly recommend you take a look at it and consider using it. It's something we keep updated every year, and I think it really goes a long way to making these things less intimidating of an application. I use a lot of Sanborn historic maps. These are great ways to look in environmental histories of properties. There's a lot publicly available through the Library of Congress. I've also got a favorite tool that I'm supporting. It's called Old Insurance Maps, and they help you do overlays of these historic maps on current maps, and you can put them in shared visibility, things like that. So for example, you can see an apartment building here that's built next to an old historical map of the benzene ammonia plant, or you can see where the gas stations used to be along old Route 66, for example. So if you have any questions about this type of stuff, I love doing this. Feel free to reach out and we'll have a conversation about it. And again, if you've never used Esri or heard of it, this is definitely a suite of tools to at least know the name of and be aware of. They are definitely moving at light speed, and they just have the largest suite of tools. Some of the favorites ones that we use are tapestry segmentation, which is a way of doing market studies on areas. Things like story maps for sharing information about sites. Survey 123 is a great way to pull together data. EnviroAtlas, which is hosted by EPA, is a great mapping tool. And then there's Pro. So if you've got somebody in the public works department that really wants to know where the power grids and things are, that's really where that comes into play. So you could spend an entire career studying this particular suite of tools, but needless to say, it's certainly something to be aware of if you've never heard of it. One other tool that's very useful on the local level, and this is an ArcGIS tool. It's hosted through Missouri Department of Natural Resources. It's called eStart. It's a site tracking tool for many historical environmental issues. So you can look and see where brownfield investigations were, where any tanks that are known about, former gas stations, things like that. So long story short, here's the kind of services that we provide. We're, again, no cost. We don't have an application process either. We just take inquiries on a rolling basis and figure out when we can fit them into our calendar and who we can line up. One of the things I like to say is that, so we have an acronym for everything. So I decided I needed to come up with an acronym for my email address. So my email acronym stands for Just Reach Out Here to Engage Rapidly. So seriously, just send me an email and we can start a conversation from there. It's a very informal process to get you started. And I always like to say, don't delay, start now, which sounds like a car salesman type of thing, but it's not. And one more final point to make, there's a National Brownfields Conference. This does not happen every year, so this is a special year. It's going to be happening in Chicago. If you plan to be going, please reach out. We'd love to connect while we're there. TAB's going to be hosting a social event as well, so we'd love to get a chance to meet up and talk in person as well. That's always a nice extra level of involvement. So with that, I think I'll go ahead and pass it off to Keith.
Hey, good morning, and thank you both, Sarah and Jacob, for going before me, and thanks to KSU TAB for promoting and hosting this consortium of sorts. Good morning, guys. I am Keith Slider, and I serve as the Brownfields Cleanup Lead Project Manager within EPA Region 7. I have over 25 years of experience as an environmental professional. My specialty is brownfields projects, and I've worked as a private consultant for a variety of brownfields projects within the Kansas City region, including the T-Mobile Stadium project, the entire KC Live downtown redevelopment projects, and a host of other smaller projects within the Kansas City area. I would like to take you on a brief walk through some basic brownfield steps that we do and how we can assist you with assisting your communities. Again, Brownfield serves as a partnership with the state of Missouri, Missouri Department of Natural Resources. We also work tandem with the KSU TAB in assisting communities in developing their projects so that we can help you clean your communities up. Next slide. The mission of Brownfields is simple: to empower states, tribes, communities, and other stakeholders, including not-for-profit organizations, to work together to prevent, assess, clean up, and provide sustainable reuse of brownfields projects. Next. How do we do this? Brownfield helps communities by helping them revitalize abandoned properties that need assistance and meet our eligibility goals for a brownfield site. Liability protections, of course, include to encourage those smaller not-for-profits and, of course, cities, municipalities with redeveloping these projects, and to remove or mitigate the liabilities that may be associated with those projects. Next. In our brownfield assessments, we provide a variety of services to help our communities. We provide grants, technical assistance and guidances. Those grants often include cleanup and remediation grants to follow. Other services that we offer, of course, include our targeted brownfield assessment program, which provides free services. Those services include phase 1 environmental site assessments, phase 2 ESAs, which of course are a follow-up to the phase 1s and include sampling methodologies. And lastly, if needed, an APCA preparation, or furthermore, site revitalization programming, which of course includes reuse and marketabilities of projects. Next. Our cleanup efforts generally include competitive cleanup grants, revolving loan fund grants, and multi-purpose assessment grants, which is a good mixture of assessments and cleanup grants. Again, these grants are extremely competitive, so we always encourage our participants to prepare thoroughly, prepare early, and bring your A game. Next slide, please. Our grants also can be used to provide job training, much needed job training and employment opportunities that involve areas of the environmental industry, especially to those where the sites are located in. Jobs like transporting hazardous material, hazardous waste, asbestos and lead abatement, and 40-hour WAPR training are just a few introductory training courses that these type of job training grants can cover. And that has been a big seller for local areas, especially in small rural areas where maybe the job opportunities are low. These programs are ideal for helping moving the project along. Next. Our technical assistance includes the services provided by us and our select contractors. It can include everything from our targeted brownfields assessment program, which could, of course, include the phase 1 and phase 2 and sampling, some structural, but not much, depending on the type of project, and some site revitalization efforts. We always encourage, like Jacob said, for our grantees to get a hold of us early, or anyone who may be thinking about a project to just touch base with us and see if it makes sense, or see how we can help you make the project work within the confines of either our program. Typically, if MoDNR cannot take a project, if we have the room for it, we'll take on the project, depending on certain circumstances. We'll work through those things. Next slide, please. In a nutshell, our land revitalization program provides guides, tools, and training necessary to help communities with the best practices and to decipher the best uses for their sites. Every site is different. no site is the same, and needs of the community are different. So we take those into account, and we help to remedy the problems that are the challenges that each project has within each community. Next. Our technical assistance in Region 7 is currently provided through, of course, KSU TAB. Additionally, you can always contact us or contact me personally. We'd be happy to help uh, with anything that we can provide, even if it's small amount of consulting or help with your thresholds. We can help with that as well, and we can also provide direction of who you may be able to contact and set up meetings if that is necessary. Next. And this is again our region. Our region, of course, includes Missouri, Iowa, and Nebraska. Is a little bit smaller than KSU's TAB region. Theirs is a little bit broader than ours, but we are willing to help you with those needs. Next, please. Of course, the up and coming Brownfields conference will be held in Chicago, August the 5th through the 8th, 2025. You're welcome to attend. Uh, Registration is definitely filling up quickly. I know this is short notice, but definitely feel free to engage in that opportunity to get technical advice, technical support, network opportunities, and it's always a good place to meet other grantees who are in attendance in these conferences and see how their projects work and how to make yours work as well. Next, please. Again, my name is Keith Slider. This is my contact email. It is my my preferred method of communication, and I'm happy to respond to you in a timely manner. Feel free to give me drop an E if you need any further information regarding our service, even if you just need some mild direction on who to contact and how to move your project forward. Thank you.
Excellent. Thanks, Keith. So now we've got some time that we've left for folks that want to maybe unmute and ask a question, or you can enter it in a chat box if you like. One other thing that we really ask for people to do is we have a survey that helps give us feedback on what we're doing, and it also helps us with our reporting of being able to reach people and things like that. So if you folks don't mind, I know I get survey fatigue and everyone's always asking for my feedback, but this really does mean a lot to us to help keep our programs moving and things like that. So if you don't mind, you can either scan the QR code or we can drop the link in the chat box here. We'll also put our emails. So if you just want to continue the conversation offline, seriously, feel free to reach out to any three of us. We all work together a lot. We always wind up in the same meetings and talking to the same people. So we're just really excited, I think, to do the work. But if folks have questions, now's a good time.
Hi, this is Adam Trotwine. I had a quick question for Sarah about the Brownfield tax credit. If that's all right. Yeah, Sarah, you mentioned that part of the tax credit eligibility requirement is that it creates jobs and or some sort of economic benefit, I guess, to the community, for lack of a better word. How is that information reported to DNR, or like what sort of reporting obligations, I guess, go along with so a recipient of the tax credit? Do they just file a certification that the jobs were reported, or is there something more, I guess, is something more required in terms of proving that you created the jobs that were necessary?
I will do the best I can to answer it. It's a different program. It's not under Missouri Department of Natural Resources. It's under Department of Economic Development. And from my understanding is before they will award you tax credits, you have to create a plan and show that you're going to create those 10 jobs or retain 25 jobs. And I believe they give you 75% of the tax credits up front, and they will give you 25% at the back end once everything's completed. And so the reporting is probably at that back end, and that's when you will get the rest of the money, that last 25%. That's the best I can do. If you want like some contact information, I can certainly get that for you if you want to reach out. Someone with Department of Economic Development, I can certainly point you the right way.
And
Thank you.
if I can chime in for Adam, one key area that you would probably need to address prior to even, I guess, applying for this tax credit is obviously to have your site designated as a brownfield site. I think the best way to do that is to, contact EPA and have us conduct what's called a site eligibility on your site. And what we just would basically do is deem it as definitely a brownfield site so that you would kind of alleviate the back and forth that you might get uh, from, any agency saying, oh, well, this may not necessarily be a brownfield site.
Yeah, okay, great. Thanks, Keith. That's really helpful. And I assume EPA does that outside of Region 7 as well.
Absolutely. Yes.
Yeah.
And be sure and, just let them know, whomever you're speaking with, that, hey, all I need is a site eligibility so that I can get a tax credit. So can you, do what you do and send us a memo for site eligibility as a brownfield site.
Okay, that's great. Do you know what I mean, this, not to put you on the spot, but what's the typical turnaround time for a site eligibility?
It varies from region to region. Here in Region 7, we've, depending on, what we have going on, typically it's around 30 days to get it done.
Okay.
But we have our peaks and our lows. Like right now, we're preparing our recent grant recipients getting their funding together. So this is kind of that's high priority for us. But we can work that in. So just let us know what you're doing. And why you're doing it. It's not related to necessarily a grant. You just want the site eligibility classification as a brownfield site.
Okay, great. Thank you.
Mm-hmm.
While we're waiting for more questions to come in, I'm gonna go ahead and mention like Missouri has their own Brownfields conference, and this year it's gonna be on July 14th. We have scholarships available for local governments and nonprofit organizations, and I believe the links for that is attached to the website for the webinar. You're welcome to fill out a application for a scholarship. We have about 50 of them available, and that's going to cover hotel as well as breakfast and lunch that day during the conference. And the conference this year is at Margaritaville Lake Resort in Osage Beach, or Lake of the Ozarks, Missouri. And it's a whole day of brownfields, and there's like hands-on activities, and it's really expanding on what we've done here at this 1 hour webinar into a whole day with a whole bunch of different speakers that come in. And there's exercises, there's a little workbook that you'll be able to take home with you, kind of helping you sort through your projects, see what your next steps are, meet and network with people here in Missouri if you can't make it to the one in Chicago. And I think it's a great resource if anybody wants to attend that. And please sign up for a scholarship if you're eligible. So,
And what's the date of the conference?
July 14th.
Very good. Looks like we have a question about the phase 2. So I can expand upon this a little bit. We sort of briefed over this quickly, but essentially a brownfields remediation project has 3 stages. So there's phase 1, which is sort of environmental background check, historical research, no actual sampling goes on at that step. Then there's the phase 2 that involves actual sampling on the site based on what the phase 1 found. So if it's, for example, says the site used to be a gas station or it used to be next door to dry cleaners, therefore we would recommend doing some subsurface sampling or water sampling, air quality from vapors, things like that. So a phase 2 involves actual testing on a site to get actual numbers, whereas the phase 1 is a very screening level thing. And then phase 3 is remediation, where based on the results of the phase 2, you determine what needs to be done to get the property cleaned up to an acceptable level. So the phase 2 can be a very complex document with lots of scientific results. Many samples are taken. It really depends on the scale of the project. So a small site might only have a handful of samples required, and they can always do a phase 2 addendum, which comes back and says, okay, we got low numbers in these areas, but this area we had an unusual number. Let's go ahead and take more samples in this area as well. So doing a phase 2 is not necessarily all inclusive. It's sort of in a way of becoming progressively more understanding of what areas need to be looked at more closely, because they can be very expensive. Whereas, for example, a phase 1 might cost a few $1,000s. A phase 2 could easily cost tens of thousands of dollars or even hundreds of thousands of dollars, for some of these larger old industrial sites, things like that. So really the phase 2 is where the numbers come in, actual sampling gets done on a site. Phase 1 is more of a desktop review of pulling records and things just to understand what the previous use of the site was. And I will say a phase 2 can take variable amounts of time. It's probably one of the, other than the actual remediation, it can be one of the longest pieces, because there's a lot of coordinating contractors, coordinating site access. A lot of times the phase 2s come along when somebody's looking to purchase a property and they just want to know just how dirty is this property. And so in the commercial real estate world, there's like due diligence periods. And so sometimes, kind of the standard for that sometimes is only 60 days and things like that. And by the time you've scrambled together contractors to get samples pulled, and sometimes you want to watch and see if numbers change over time, because things do attenuate. So depending on how old the spill might be, for example, or where the leakage was, sometimes just exposing things to oxygen can change numbers. Sometimes water can move things and attenuate over time. So things do change over time. So while it is a static number, you might want to also plan for the timeline of doing resampling and things like that, or having to mobilize multiple times, or things like field conditions where you plan to go out and take samples in a muddy field, and then you get torrential rain like we've been having a lot of in Missouri recently, and all of a sudden you can't get the drill rig out to the spot because it's going to sink in the mud and you have to delay. And a lot of times these like we said, time can kill these real estate deals, and so really starting these as soon as possible is a really important piece. One of the other things we run into in the developer world is that if when they go to make an offer on the property, those results aren't already available, they might just pass on the property and move on to the next one, just because of the amount of time it can take to get those results to even determine if the property is usable. Everything may have a cleanup cost, but what order of magnitude the cleanup cost will be, it's not necessarily the money. A lot of times it's the time. So those are things to keep in mind, I think, when you're looking at phase 2s. And again, that's something TAB can help you with, be it finding a contractor to help perform the work, or be it reviewing the results. So the contractor gives you a report, they drop it off, and it's a 500-page binder on your desk, and you say, what do I do with this? We can help you translate those type of things into something more of a layman's terms. But I just want to say thank you to everybody who was hopped on and learned about brownfields. Please feel free to reach out and take advantage of the help that's available.